than usual, and we're starting a new series. And the series, I'm calling it A Tale of Two People. And it'll make more sense to you as you listen to the first sermon today. Title is called Hidden Among the Supplies. Passage is from 1Samuel chapter 10, verses 17 to 24. But I'm going to pick it up from verse 20 and read from verse 20. When Samuel had all Israel come forward by tribes, the tribes of Benjamin was taken by lot. Then he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was taken. Finally, Saul, son of Kish, was taken. But when they looked for him, he was not to be found. So they inquired further of the Lord, has the man come here yet? And the Lord said, yes, he has hidden himself among the supplies. They ran and brought him out. And as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. Samuel said to all the people, do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There's no one like him among all the people. Then the people shouted, long live the king. Amen. As we begin the new series, I'm going to start with a painting that I want to show you. This painting is called The Calling of Saint Matthew by Caravaggio. If you're an Italian, please forgive me. But this is a 17th century painting which belongs to this artist by the name C, Mr. C. What's unique about this painting is that it uses this technique called chiaroscuro. It's an Italian word made up of two words, light and dark. And maybe that's just by saying that you're starting to get an idea of what that means. Basically, the artist uses light and darkness to show and uses that light and darkness to create bold contrast to not only create a sense of volume on objects that you see and figures, but also to heighten their emotional tension. Because of the dark part, the lighter part comes alive even more, stronger, right? And those of you who are artists, if forgive me for my ignorance if you know much more about this. But I just want to use this as an illustration as we begin a new series. In the Bible, we come across many different characters, people. And as I was praying into the next series that we're going to do for the summer, I kept coming back to these characters that we often overlook in the Bible. Why do we overlook them? Because they're not our typical heroes of faith that we learn about in the Bible or look up to. You know, typically we look up to our Abrahams, our Moses, and we focus on those characters. But then there are these characters who fail miserably in the Bible. And we often overlook them. But it occurred to me, there's got to be a message or two which God wants to give to us even through these characters who mess up, who fail, and even get rejected by God. And the first person that came to my mind was King Saul. When I think about an unfortunate character in the Bible, he's always been the number one on my list. And the reason is because I relate to him in so many different ways at different levels. And yet, it's so unfortunate as to what happens to him. And you will read about that, and if you don't know that already. So, I'll talk about Saul, and I started, meditating into this character as I'm getting ready for this series. But then, also, it occurred to me that these characters that I'm thinking about, people like Saul, in the Bible do not appear in isolation. What I mean is, these characters, most of them in the Bible, actually appear in pairs, in comparison and contrast to each other. And together, they give us a message. The chiaroscuro effect, if you will. So if you could see Saul as like the dark part of this painting, because his life is quite dark, God's not just showing us darkness, but He's showing us through that character, in comparison with other characters, wants to show us the light as well. What's the purpose? So that He could show us our darkness, but also for us to not remain in that darkness, but move towards the light where He wants to take us. So just like the first sentence of Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, which begins this way: it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And I think in the Bible, in these characters, we see both. We read about these characters in the Bible, and we see our worst in these biblical characters. Do we not? But at the same time, through these other characters in the Bible, God shows us our possible best as well. So through this light and darkness, where He brings two characters together in one painting and paints this picture for us, He wants us to show both our darkness and also the light to which we are to move. So it's within that context we will begin our series and focus on King Saul, who is the first king in Israel. And when we actually go to chapter 9 of 1 Samuel, this is what it says about King Saul. As handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel. And he was a head taller than anyone else. I don't know if, Saul was, taller than Jimmy or not. But I'm pretty sure Jimmy is better looking than Saul. But he was at least pretty good looking. Just like Jimmy is head taller than all of us here. Saul was the tallest guy, one of the tallest guys in the nation, and one of the most handsome guys as well. Prophet Samuel, I'm choking thinking about Jimmy's beauty and handsomeness. He is so handsome. I'm choking right now. Prophet Samuel calls all the people and appoints Saul as king. Look, everyone, he is king. But then just as we read, how does Saul respond to that? Has the man come here yet? And the Lord said, yes. But he has hidden himself among the supplies. God calls him, appoints him to be king in front of everyone, but he's hiding. Now, is this an act of humility? Some people think so. So some do interpret it that way. Oh, Saul was in the beginning at least very humble. But I don't see this as humility. See what happens right after in verse 23. They ran and brought him out, and as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. So you've got the tallest guy, best looking guy, most fit guy, hiding behind the supplies, and people who are much smaller and shorter come and drag him out. That's not something that looks pretty good on that guy. It's not a very flattering picture, if you ask me. So I think that's why I don't think this is Saul being humble. There's another reason why I don't think he's being humble, because this is actually not the first time that God tells him that you will be king. In fact, you just go one chapter before chapter 10 of 1 Samuel. Samuel actually meets Saul individually and tells him that you will be king. But then when Saul hears it in chapter 9, this is how he responds. But am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? And is now my clan the least of all the clans of the tribes of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing to me? He's like, no. I'm not worthy to be king. I'm not. Okay, good. Maybe initially it's understandable. But he spends night with Samuel, and Samuel not only appoints him and tells him that you're going to be king, takes oil and pours it on his head too. This is a ritual that is recognized as God actually appointing him to be king. But then the next day, as he's coming back home, he meets his uncle. And his uncle says, well, you went to look for your dad's donkeys, right? Did you find it? Well, no, but Samuel said, I'll find them. But what happened? Tell me what happened with that prophet. And this is what Saul says. Verse 16. He assured us that the donkeys had been found, but he did not tell his uncle what Samuel had said about the kingship. So Saul hides it. He doesn't tell his uncle what happened. Initially, I understand. I mean, even for me, you, right? You're going to be king. Me? No. But this wasn't the first time. God had already told him. Saul had time to deal with it, wrestle with it, and follow God's will and desire. But when the time came for him to be appointed as king, he's hiding behind the supplies. You'll have to see his life in entirety to answer this question, but why is he hiding? Well, having seen his entire life, let me just give you what I think is the answer as to why Saul is hiding when God calls him to be king. I think he was obsessed. Obsessed with what? Himself. The more you read about his life, you will see that he was a man who was so self-obsessed to the extreme. What others think of him, what others say of him, say to him, how he might appear to others. You see that this is a man who is obsessed with himself. But here's Saul, whom God appointed as king, and God is fulfilling Genesis 1 command and promise. You will rule for me. That's the language of kingship in Genesis 1. When God created human beings, I created everything, but you rule over it for me. And through these kings in the Old Testament, God is showing us that you and I are called to be royal people who rule for God and on behalf of God, become royal people that He has created us to be. But because Saul is so obsessed with himself, when God calls him, he's hiding. Let's compare this to David. Now, we're going from the dark part of the painting to the light part of the painting, chiaroscuro. We go to King David, who is the next king after Saul. God promises David too, and this is what he tells him. Check 2 Samuel chapter 7. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, and appointed you ruler over my people Israel. You're going to be king. But what God tells David is even more than Saul. Saul was like, you're going to be king, all right? Well, what he tells David is that not only are you going to be king, your descendants will sit on the throne forever. That's what God tells David. Initially, it seems like David is self-obsessed too when he hears it. So this is what he says, verse 18. Who am I, sovereign Lord, and what is my family that you have brought me this far? Sounds very similar to what Saul said and how he responded. It seems like David is self-obsessed too. But if you keep reading on and see what David says, we see that David is not self-obsessed. His focus is elsewhere. Where's that focus? Verse 20. What more can David say to you? For you know your servant, sovereign Lord. He says, well, God, I am nobody, your servant in his house. Do as you promised so that your name will be great forever. You see how his attention is not on himself? Yes, initially he's like overwhelmed. No, me, king, throne, my descendant forever. No, that's just too big, God. No, you know who I am. Yes, he is looking at himself too, but he begins to shift his attention towards God. And then he even says this, 27, Lord Almighty, God of Israel, you have revealed this to your servant, saying, I will build a house for you. So your servant has found courage to pray this prayer for you. You know what he's saying? I am nobody, and you gave me such big promise, Lord. But you know what? It's you. You have said it. So you know what? I'm going to actually start praying that you do it. Verse 28, Sovereign Lord, you are God. Your covenant is trustworthy, and you have promised these good things to your servant. Now be pleased to bless the house of your servant, that it may continue forever in your sight. He's now saying, you know, God, yes, do it, please. I mean, when I think about myself, I don't know how that's going to be possible, but I trust in you. I'm simply your servant. You do what you say you will do. Bless my family, he says. It's not about me. I'm just a servant. It's about you. So please do it, Lord. What's the difference between Saul and David? I'll use these two terms to describe each of them. While Saul was self-obsessed, I think David was self-aware. What happens when a person is self-obsessed? Triple A. Get angry, get annoyed, get ashamed. When the person is aware, self-aware, that person acknowledges himself or herself as who he or she is. But when a person becomes self-obsessed, everything, you're just thinking about yourself, what others think of me, how I feel, how they're going to respond if I do this or that. You become angry because you'll be thinking, why did that person look at me this way? You know, did you guys ever do this? Like those of you who are younger, when you're in high school, it's like you're walking and then with your friends and then another group of friends come. You don't know who they are. You have no idea who they are, but you lock eyes to each other. You're like, hey man, why'd you look at me like that? And then brawl takes place. I'm like, we don't even know each other. Just because how they looked at us was like, made us saying, oh, okay. Samuel was like, I don't know what that is. I've never done that. Sorry. Unfortunately, I did stuff like that. Lord, forgive me, trying to act so cool and thinking that I'm a gangster when I'm nobody, right? When you're self-obsessed, you get so caught up in that. And not only you get annoyed, ashamed, and angry, you basically lose out on life, calling that God has given you, because you're so focused on yourself. But this doesn't just happen with individuals. It happens with churches too. Churches that are so self-obsessed, for whatever reason, because we're this great church and we've become this humongous church, we've got this great thing going. If the church becomes so self-obsessed, that church will start to run the risk of falling into pride, and may well very lead to their downfall. Same with missions organization. God is using our organization in an amazing way, and then it's all good, but then at some point you get so self-obsessed, we're great, we're awesome, and then pride kicks in, and the mission organization begin to crumble. This happens with countries too. Our country is so great, and then you get so self-obsessed about your own country. Next thing you know, you become proud nation and you've abandoned God. Humility is gone. This is why, friends, you guys need to watch out for success. In whatever place, if you achieve some level of success, there's a chance that you might run the risk of running into self-obsession. Who do they think I am? Do they not know what I have accomplished? Do they not know what kind of company I run? Do they not? How dare they say this to me or think this about me? This is why you gotta be really careful when God grants you success. Self-obsession. Is it just me or do you experience it too? How do we overcome it? Do what David did. Be self-aware, fully know who you are, acknowledge who you are, but be self-aware and begin moving towards who? The Lord. Begin focusing on Him, what He is doing. Take your eyes off yourself, this self-obsession that we have. Begin to look at God and focus on what He wants to do through you. I've always been a person who is very self-aware. This is just how I was made up and built. My makeup is like that. So even when I was young, as you know, I was very self-aware. I wanted to improve myself. I was thinking about who I am and so on. But then there were these moments growing up when my self-awareness actually became self-obsession. And I'm going to tell you how that happened. Came to this country when I was 12 years old and went into school, high school. And out of entire school, there were only 2 people who could not speak English. Me and my brother. Everyone else, they all spoke English. And I'm literally saying this like we were the only 2. And I have these moments from my high school days of shame. You know, these moments where like I would say something and some of these guys are going like, what? Well, I don't know what you're saying. That shame that just came over me in those moments. I still remember it vividly. I say something and they'll try to mock me by copying my accent. Hey, my accent is beautiful. What are you doing? You know, but I couldn't think that way back then. And just kind of like making fun of me for the way I say certain words. Times passed. I moved on. And I became a pastor and associate pastor of the biggest Korean church in Vancouver. And because I was bilingual, when the senior pastor would do bilingual service, I would always be the one called upon to translate and interpret for him. But then those of you who have ever done, translating or interpreting for someone, you really have to be able to think on your feet really quickly because the speaker will give you manuscript, but sometimes the speaker would stray from the manuscript and you're like, he said he wouldn't do it, but it's not on the manuscript. And then you just quickly gotta think of something. Okay, how do I translate this out? And then on your feet, you have to just translate it. He did one of those things. So he was just speaking, and then he said something very idiomatic in Korean. And now that's difficult to even translate. What would be the best idiom that's equivalent to this idiom in Korean into English? And I just, on my feet, I'm like, I just said something. And those who knew both languages burst into laughter. Because they probably thought, this in Korean and that in English sounds really funny. Service is over. I come down, and one of the young adults approached me and said, Pastor Daniel! And then there was a moment where I'm like, those memories started triggering again. That shame, right? Those moments when I got made fun of for how I say things. I'm like, you try, man. You know how hard it is to do translation and interpreting for someone? Thing about interpreting for someone is you do 9 out of 10 times you get it all right. One time you get it wrong, afterward they all talk about that. I'm like, you try it, how hard it is. But he didn't mean ill. He was just making, he was just being funny. But there was that moment where that shame could have kicked in. Self-obsession could have kicked in. But I knew better. I knew he wasn't trying to mock me. He was just being close to me, showing me that he's close to me, right? That he's able to joke about these things with me. The residue of shame wanted to kick in. It hit me, but it didn't knock me over. And I kept going. I didn't refuse to translate for him if I was called upon. I mean, how can I say no to a senior pastor? I would have still done it. But I could have just said, no, but I kept doing it. And believe it or not, I would like to believe it so to be the case. To this day, at that church, I would like to think that I remain as one of the best interpreters that they had. So here's our takeaway, friends. Please don't be obsessed with yourself, but be captivated by the Lord. How easy is it for us to get trapped in our self-obsession, right? We're just thinking about ourselves. I'm like, I'm so ashamed. I'm so embarrassed. Oh, that person said this. I'm like, what was he thinking? What is she saying? Does she mean this or that? And we're like, you just get caught up in that, that self-obsession that just destroys us. But just like that painting, Chiaroscuro, if you see that painting, Jesus calls the tax collector, Matthew, from darkness in that painting. He brings him out into the light and appoints him as his disciple. Guys, let's get over it. Let's get over ourselves. Let's not get caught up in this self-obsession, just always being so sensitive about me and how that's keeping you from becoming beautiful people of God that you are supposed to be. One of the best ways where we can move away from our self-obsession is prayer. But what's ironic is that often in prayer often becomes a place where we become more self-obsessed. Because we take our issues to prayer and you're like, oh God, me, I'm going through this and this. We begin there, but prayer is supposed to be a place where we move away from our self-obsession through our self-awareness in God, but we move to God and His purpose and His calling and His work for our lives. And one of the best ways we can do that is when we stop just praying for ourselves, but we pray for others. You like how I'm tying this to Sunday World Mission? Like some of you are thinking, brilliant, Pastor Daniel, right? That's what you're thinking, right? See, she's like, brilliant. Look at her smile. Brilliant, Pastor Daniel, you know. She's so satisfied with what I'm doing right now. Yeah, good. So if we take our eyes off ourselves, begin praying for people who are so far away from us, that's when we begin to forget our self-obsession. Missionary Lee in America, he lives in America now, but what he wrote, I try to summarize it and translate that into English, but he says this. He says, we are all missionaries. Missionaries are not just people who go overseas or leave church to go and do missions. We're all missionaries. Why? Because there are those, next one, who are going missionaries, but then there are sending missionaries. And what sending missionaries do is that they go on their knees to pray for mission. So these are the sending missionaries. So he says, whether you go or not, we're all missionaries. So Isaiah chapter 52, verse 7, I added one more word to this verse. How beautiful on the mountain are not only the feet of those who bring good news, but knees of those who bring good news or pray for the good news to be shared. And when we go on our knees to pray for more than just ourselves, I don't even know what this nation is yet. I have to look it up today. But when we go beyond ourselves, move away from our self-obsession, start thinking about God things, bigger things, that's when we start to forget that we're self-obsessed people. What were you obsessed about last week? What was that one thing where you just got so caught up about like, oh me, oh no, me again, I did this, I did that. Let's get over it. Let's just open our eyes and begin to see God who is so much bigger and so much, who has an amazing big vision to call you king, royal people that He wants you to become. So if you have your flag with me, would you just lift it up for me to show one another what your flag is? So after we sing our song, Make Room, we're going to pray for ourselves and we're going to pray for this nation, whatever the flag that you're holding on to. If you don't know the name of this country yet, just, I pray for this nation. Take this flag with you. I kind of sort of thought that. Somewhere around there. I was like, Bangladesh or around there. Thank you. So, hey, I'm praying for Bangladesh, right? So you got your flags. But you know a song that we're going to sing as the praise team comes up, Make Room? Isn't this the confession of what our sermon is? It's like, God, there's no room for you to step into my life because my room is so filled with self-obsession. I'm always just thinking about how I feel, how I respond, and how I feel so sensitive when this person says this. I'm just thinking about how I got hurt all the time. Yes, that's true. But God, today, I want to make room. I want to get rid of the clutters in my room, clean them all out, clean out my self-obsession so that you can come in to my room and my life and start changing my life and start using me as your kings and queens. Let's make that our confession today. Would you stand with me? Let's sing this song together.